I watched him walk away that night, without ever saying a word. And it was better that way. Because what would I have said? Look at what you missed. No, he already knew. Every ounce of confidence I had lost in our marriage had grown back twice as strong in his absence. I no longer needed to remind him who I was. The room already did that for me. From the way Lucas held my hand to the way people leaned in when I spoke, my presence answered every question he never bothered to ask when he still had me. That night, Lucas didn't ask how I felt about seeing him again. He just brought me tea, kissed my shoulder, and sat with me in silence until I was ready to speak. That's what made him different. He didn't pry. He didn't perform comfort. He gave it without expectation. And when I finally exhaled and said, "I thought I'd shake, but I didn't," he just nodded. "That's because you're not her anymore." And he was right. I wasn't the girl who flinched. I was the woman who stared back. I used to fantasize about revenge, about walking into a room like that one and watching him fall apart. But when it actually happened, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved, like I had finally closed a book I'd reread too many times. And the best part? I hadn't needed to rewrite the ending. I simply became someone he couldn't reach anymore. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost the version of me who ever wanted him. And when a man realizes you don't hate him, you've outgrown him. That's when the silence hits the loudest. I shared the whole story at our next women's circle, not to gossip, to free it. The women listened, some in shock, others nodding quietly because they knew the feeling. One of them whispered, "You didn't even look at him like he mattered anymore." I smiled. That's because he doesn't. And that was the truth. I wasn't pretending to be healed. I was. My healing didn't scream. It didn't post status updates. It wore red lipstick and walked past its past without looking over its shoulder. And that's the version I swore I'd protect with everything in me. The next week, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, a picture from the networking event. I was mid-laugh, Lucas beside me, a glow in both of us that was too real to fake. Written on the back were 6 words in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. "You look like someone I lost." I stared at it for a long time. Then I ripped it in half. Because I wasn't lost. I was exactly where I chose to be. And the only person who didn't know that was him. I stopped wondering what would have happened if he'd chosen me. Because the truth, I don't think I ever really had him. I had his attention. I had his guilt. But not his heart. And that's what I now understood. Love that makes you shrink isn't love. It's dependency. And I wasn't interested in being anyone's security blanket ever again. Lucas didn't hold me back. He didn't fix me. He walked beside me. That's what partnership is. Not a rescue mission, but a revolution you survive together. My parents visited that month. They were surprised by the way I spoke. Direct, calm, not asking permission with every sentence. My mother said, "You've changed." I said, "No." I finally stopped apologizing. My father asked if I missed him. The ex. I didn't hesitate. Not even a little. It shocked them. But what shocked me more was how easy it was to say. That's what healing does. It turns things that once cracked your voice into simple facts. I didn't miss him. I miss myself. And now that I had her back, I wasn't losing her again. I started teaching workshops in emotional recovery through storytelling. Not for money, for meaning. Women came in with shaking hands, brittle voices, and by the end of each session, they left taller. One woman said, "I thought I'd never feel powerful again." I told her, "You already are. You just forgot." And that was the mission now. Not to be admired, but to be mirrored. If they could see themselves in me, they'd stop shrinking in their own lives. And if I had to relive my story to give them that strength, it was worth every scar. Lucas built me a small studio behind our home. It had skylights, white walls, and a shelf just for my journals. This is yours, he said. All of it. And when I stepped inside, I cried. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. Because for years, I had built homes for people who didn't love me. Now, someone had built a space for me, with no agenda, no price, no apology, just love. Love that didn't take. Love that didn't test. Love that stood still and let me grow. And the girl he thought he could come back to, she doesn't live here anymore. The woman who answered the door, she was never his to begin with. The studio became my sanctuary, not just for journaling or painting, but for breathing, for remembering I didn't have to be small to be loved. I filled it with soft music, strong coffee, and books that reminded me what healing really looked like. It wasn't linear. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. On the wall, I hung a photo Lucas had taken of me reading, sunlight on my face, no makeup, hair a mess, and I looked at peace. That's my favorite version of you, he said once. I told him, it's the one I fought hardest to find. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership summit. I almost said no. The idea of being on stage, telling strangers about the version of me that had begged, cried, and lost herself in a man, it felt raw. But Lucas said, you're not sharing pain. You're sharing proof. That shifted everything. So I agreed. I wrote my talk with honesty, not decoration. I didn't want applause. I wanted awakening. And if even one woman in that crowd walked out feeling like she could rise again, then I had done something real. The day of the summit, I walked onto that stage in a soft navy suit, and no script in my hand. I didn't need notes. The story lived in my bones. I spoke about how betrayal feels like suffocation, about how silence can be a war zone, about how choosing yourself, truly choosing yourself, is the most radical thing a woman can do. There were no tears in my voice, only steel. And when I finished, the room was so quiet, it felt sacred. Then came the applause, not wild but steady, solid, the kind that says, we see you, and we see ourselves in you, too. After the summit, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been older than 20. How did you know you were finally healed? She asked. I thought about it, then said, when I no longer needed to prove anything to him, or to anyone. Healing isn't about feeling good every day. It's about not letting old wounds write your story anymore. It's when you stop rehearsing what you'd say if you saw them again. When you walk into a room, and they're there, and your peace stays intact. That's when you know you didn't just survive. You reclaimed. That night, Lucas cooked dinner while I played the piano, an old habit I'd stopped years ago because my ex once said, you're not that good, you know? Lucas never said a word about my playing. He just listened, then kissed my fingers when I finished. You don't have to be great, he said. You just have to be you. That's what love looks like. Not a performance. Not constant proving. Just space. Just safety. And once you've had that, you'll never let anyone take it away again. We traveled that fall, not to escape, but to celebrate. Italy, Kyoto, South Africa, places I'd once only dreamed of back when my world was small and my thoughts revolved around how to keep a man who didn't even want to stay. On a rooftop in Florence, sipping wine as church bells rang, I told Lucas, I used to think love meant sacrifice. He shook his head. Love means expansion. And I realized he was right. I hadn't lost anything. I had just finally made room for everything else. The women's group I led began growing beyond the studio. Online sessions, retreats, guest speakers, and always stories. We never gave advice. We gave truth. And the truth was, most of us were taught to wait, to soften, to forgive before we were even apologized to. But no more. These women weren't bitter. They were done shrinking. One wrote me a message after a retreat. You didn't just teach me how to move on. You reminded me that I was never the one who failed. That's what keeps me going. Not the numbers. The echo. I wrote a book, not a memoir, a guide, half stories, half strategy, titled simply, Leave First, because that's what I want every woman to remember. You don't need to be pushed to go. You can choose yourself before they break you, before they walk away, before they convince you that your value is negotiable. The book wasn't flashy, but it was real. And when it hit shelves, I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my ex. I just held it in my hands and whispered, "This is for her. The girl I used to be. The girl who stayed too long." My ex tried again, not with a call, with an invitation to a mutual friend's wedding. I wasn't sure if he knew I'd be on the guest list, but something in me said he hoped I'd come alone. I didn't. Lucas was beside me in a crisp gray suit, hand at the small of my back, his energy calm, grounded, unbothered. My ex looked at me like he'd seen a ghost, but I was no ghost. I was living, breathing, radiant. And this time, I didn't just walk past him. I raised a glass to myself because I was finally where I belonged. That evening, I danced without care, not to be seen, not to make him jealous, but because I wanted to. The music didn't remind me of heartbreak. It reminded me of freedom, of who I had fought to become. Lucas pulled me in close, smiled into my ear, and said, "You are your own best story." And I knew it was true, not because of how far I'd come, but because I no longer needed to be rescued from anything, not even the memory of him. I was dead, not buried, but broken in the quiet way only love can shatter you. He told me he needed space, then left for a coworker whose voice was all perfume and praise. I had given him 7 years of belief, of sacrifice, of standing behind him, when he couldn't even spell loyalty. When he left, he thought I'd collapse, maybe cry for a while, then wait like some loyal ghost in our shared apartment. But I didn't. I let the silence speak for me. I didn't call. I didn't beg. And when he finally left the key on the counter and closed the door, I did something he never expected. I smiled, because that moment wasn't an ending. It was the rebirth of someone I hadn't seen in years, me. He didn't say goodbye with guilt. He said it with confidence. That's the part that used to burn me most. He believed he'd be back. Maybe after she got bored, or he hit a wall, or his guilt caught up. He thought he'd find me where he left me, still soft, still waiting. But instead, I changed my number, moved out within a week, and left behind nothing but a single note taped to the mirror. "Don't worry, you freed me." I didn't even sign it. I wanted him to guess for the rest of his life whether I meant it with pain or with peace. The first few days were quiet, too quiet. No footsteps, no slammed drawers, no passive-aggressive sighs. I had built my life around surviving him, feeding his moods, managing his damage, fixing the messes he never owned. Without him, the apartment felt like an echo chamber. But then something happened. I started to sleep better. I started breathing easier. It hit me one morning when I realized I was no longer afraid of walking on eggshells. My silence wasn't a punishment anymore. It was freedom. That's when I knew I didn't just lose a man. I lost a prison. I took my name off the lease, closed every joint account, and disappeared from his world completely. I deleted social media. I didn't want to be stalked. I didn't want him to know where I was, what I looked like, or how fast I was learning to stand on my own again. He didn't deserve to watch me bloom. Not after tearing me down. People asked where I went. I told them. Forward. No explanations. No rewinding. Because when someone walks out on you thinking they can always return, the only way to win is to never look back. I moved 2 cities away. A friend offered me her spare room for a month, and I took it with nothing but 3 suitcases and a broken heart that somehow beat louder than ever. I found work, nothing fancy, but steady. I started journaling again, drinking tea I actually liked, going to bed when I wanted. I lit candles for no one but myself. I stopped asking questions like, what would he think? And started asking, what do I want? And for the first time in years, the answers were mine. No approval needed. No compromise required. I met Lucas at a night market. He was browsing handmade ceramics, while I stared at a vase I couldn't afford. He picked it up, turned to me, and said, "If you love it, take it." I raised an eyebrow. "That's your line." He smiled. "No, that's my rule." I walked away that night without giving him my number, but he remembered me. 2 weeks later, I ran into him again at a community bookshop. This time we talked. Nothing flirty, just easy, real. He asked about my work, not my past, and that felt better than anything I'd known in years. Lucas didn't rush me. He didn't try to fix me. He listened when I wanted to talk. He backed off when I needed space. There was no performance with him, no illusion. He once said, "I don't need to know who broke you. I just want to know who you're becoming." And I knew in that moment, this man wasn't here to replace anyone. He was here to witness what I was building and protect the space I was doing it in. He didn't pull me forward. He stood beside me, and that kind of presence, it was stronger than any apology my ex ever fumbled. By the time my ex tried reaching out, just a, "Hey, how are you?" message from an unknown number. I didn't even open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it was. Not remorse. Not love. Curiosity. He wanted to see if the door was still cracked, but I had sealed that door shut with peace, therapy, and a better man. I didn't need closure. I was already whole. He didn't deserve to know what I'd become, because the version of me he left behind wasn't waiting. She was winning. I saw him again, by accident, a business networking event I'd almost skipped, but decided to attend for a client. He walked in with 2 colleagues, older, maybe tired. His eyes scanned the room, and then he froze, because he saw me, not the woman he once left, but the woman standing beside Lucas, in a black dress and heels that didn't apologize for their height. I didn't flinch. I didn't avoid him. I just smiled, not with malice, with certainty, because I saw it hit him. The moment he realized I had never been his forever. I had simply been someone he assumed would never leave. He walked toward me slowly. Lucas was mid-conversation, but noticed. I leaned into him and whispered, "It's him." Lucas looked up, calm, confident, and extended a hand before my ex could say a word. "You must be the one who thought she'd stay broken," he said, voice smooth. My ex blinked. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He looked between us, me, glowing with strength, Lucas composed and protective, and his words caught in his throat. He didn't expect this. He didn't expect me. And for once, I said absolutely nothing, because silence was the loudest closure he'd ever receive. After that wedding, he never tried to contact me again. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was shame. Or maybe he finally understood what it meant to lose something he never valued until it became unreachable. And that was the gift. Not watching him regret, but realizing I no longer cared if he did. I had detached so completely that his name didn't even flicker in my chest anymore. That's real peace. Not just when the pain fades, but when the memory carries no meaning. Like an old lock, you forgot the combination because you've built better doors. Lucas, and I built one of those doors. An actual one. A home outside the city, surrounded by trees, silence, and sunlight. He designed the garden. I chose the kitchen tiles. We hung art made by the women I once mentored. Our lives weren't loud. They were whole. And in that stillness, I found a rhythm better than revenge. Peace with no expiration date. A life not lived in reaction, but in intention. Every cup of tea, every quiet Sunday, every shared glance. It was all a reminder that leaving wasn't the loss. Staying would have been. I started mentoring younger women full-time. Not just the broken-hearted, but the almost broken. The ones on the edge. The ones still asking, is it me? I looked them in the eye and said, no, but it can be you who ends it. We cried together. We laughed. We stitched back pieces they thought were gone. And I gave them one truth, over and over. You don't need to hit the bottom to rise. You can leave while there's still something left of you. You're allowed to choose peace before chaos fully consumes you. That's not quitting. That's wisdom. One day a letter arrived. No name, just 3 words in messy handwriting. You were right. I didn't need to guess. I burned it without opening the rest. Because I didn't need an apology. I didn't need to know what had gone wrong for him. My story wasn't about him anymore. He was just a spark in the engine of a much bigger journey. I didn't hate him. I just didn't include him in the narrative. There's a power in forgetting someone so thoroughly that even their name feels like fiction. That's the kind of freedom no one can take from you. I published my second book. This one wasn't about leaving. It was about staying strong, staying soft, staying sovereign in a world that asks women to constantly choose between being wanted and being whole. It made less noise than the first, but the letters it brought in, deeper, from mothers, from grandmothers, from teenagers. I finally said no. I finally walked out. I finally stopped apologizing. These weren't just readers. They were reborn women. And I felt every syllable in my bones. Because I had been all of them. Once. Lucas never asked for a spotlight. But he became my greatest partner in creating it for others. He built websites, organized funding, took care of the background noise, so I could keep speaking clearly. And in return, I gave him honesty, vulnerability, a woman who didn't need him to complete her, but still chose him every single day. And we both knew that's the rarest kind of love, the kind that isn't born out of pain, but after it, the kind that doesn't have to prove anything. It just is. At one event, I was asked on stage, if you could tell your past self one thing, what would it be? I didn't hesitate. He's not your future. You are. And the audience didn't clap. They just exhaled. Because sometimes the loudest truth is the one you've known all along but were too afraid to say out loud. And once you say it, once you claim your own worth, it echoes. Not in others. In you. That's what makes it unshakable. That's what makes it stick. Our 10th anniversary was simple. A quiet morning walk, breakfast by the window, and an old playlist from when we first met. No gifts, no speeches, just ease. He took my hand mid-song and said, "You still surprise me." I smiled and said, "I surprise myself." Because I never thought I could live a life without fear, without performing, without chasing someone's approval. But I had. And that morning, I didn't think of what I'd lost. I thought of how far I'd come from the woman who once whispered, "Please don't leave me." We launched a foundation that fall, one dedicated to helping women leave toxic situations with financial support, legal aid, and emotional rebuilding. We called it her first step, because that's what most never take. Not because they can't, but because no one taught them how. Now, I was teaching, not through lectures, but through proof, through living it out loud, through being the kind of woman I once needed. And I promise myself, every step I take now will open a path for someone else. That's how we rise, together. And when I walk into a room now, I don't look for him. I look for her, the version of me who once felt unworthy, forgotten, small. And every time I show up fully, I remind her, "You made it." I no longer tell people the full story unless they ask, not because I'm ashamed, but because it's no longer the most important thing about me. I'm not just the woman who was left. I'm the woman who left the past behind. I don't live in that betrayal anymore. I live in my studio, in the smiles of the women I mentor, in the eyes of my husband when he sees me succeed. My life isn't one long reaction to pain. It's a masterpiece stitched together from every day I woke up and said, "I still choose me." Lucas once asked, "Do you ever think about what he's doing now?" I answered without pause. Not really. It surprised me how easy that truth came out. I didn't think of him when I succeeded. I didn't think of him when I laughed. I didn't think of him when I cried happy tears over the life I had built. The only time I ever thought of him was to remind myself how close I came to disappearing inside someone else's shadow, and how grateful I am that I escaped. At a private dinner for our foundation's anniversary, an older woman stood to speak. She had left her husband of 30 years because of a story she'd heard me tell. You reminded me I was still allowed to change, she said. I didn't cry in that moment, though I felt it rise in my chest, because she wasn't just thanking me. She was showing me the ripple. Every time I reclaimed myself, it gave someone else permission to do the same. That's the legacy I wanted, not revenge. Impact. One evening, while sorting old boxes in the attic, I came across a photo, me and my ex from the early days. We looked happy, but when I stared longer, I noticed the tension in my smile, the way I leaned into him, slightly, as if trying to earn something. I didn't throw it away. I placed it back in the box, because she deserved to be remembered, not for being foolish, but for surviving. She got me here. She kept walking even when she was crawling. And now, every step I take is for her. Lucas found me sitting on the floor, the photo still in my lap. Hard memory? He asked. I shook my head. No, just an old one. He knelt beside me, took my hand, and said, It's strange, isn't it? How far you've come without even noticing the climb. I nodded, because that was the real miracle. There was no grand arrival, no single moment of power. Just one foot in front of the other. Quiet mornings, small decisions. And now here I was, a woman who no longer flinched at her own past. People often ask if I've forgiven him. The honest answer? I didn't need to. Forgiveness is letting go of the hope for a better past. And I stopped hoping for that long ago. I don't wish him pain. I don't wish him well. I simply don't carry him anymore. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. And clarity, when earned through suffering and rebuilding, becomes a kind of armor you never have to wear because you no longer expect war. You've made peace. And that's stronger than any grudge. We built a retreat home, open twice a year to women rebuilding from the ashes. No press, no marketing, just referrals. Women came with nothing but silence in their bones, and they left with blueprints for rebirth. They didn't leave as new people. They left as real ones, whole, seen. And on the final night of each retreat, we lit a single candle and passed it around. Each woman whispered her old name, then her new one, the one she chose. And I swear to you, boss, those moments, that's the closest thing to resurrection I've ever witnessed. On our 15th anniversary, Lucas gifted me a first edition poetry book. Inside, he had written, To the woman who turned silence into thunder and pain into a platform. I read it twice before I could speak, because that's the thing about healing. You don't always notice how loudly you've lived until someone else shows you the volume. I kissed him, laughed, and said, You're still not allowed to leave your socks in the living room. And he replied, Only because you remind me every day what staying really means. I hosted one final women's circle before stepping back, not because I was tired, but because the next generation was ready. And that's the mark of real growth. Not when you're the only one shining, but when you've lit so many torches the room glows even after you leave. I sat in the back of the circle and just listened, watched, smiled, because everything I had built came from one decision, not to beg someone to stay, but to walk away first. And I'd make that choice again 1,000 times. And if he ever thinks of me now, if he ever wonders where I am, who I became, what I look like now, I hope he knows. I didn't just survive him. I made sure he'd never be able to stand beside the woman I became. Not because I left him, but because I outgrew the version of me who ever loved him at all.